Good morning. It is Tuesday, January 11th, 2022. We're in the chamber with a full slate of commissioners, our administrator, and the clerk of the board. And at this time, I'll call the meeting to order, and if you'd please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, with that, we'll start with Potts and Associates. Mr. Johnson, are they on the phone?
Jim, are you on the phone? This is Zach.
And at this time, I'd like to mention that if there are people in the historical room that may wish to have public comment during that time, please announce. If there's anyone who wishes to give public comment at this time, please come down to the rotunda when we're in public comment. Thank you.
Zach, is that you?
Yes, sir.
Very good. Please proceed.
Oh, good to chat with you guys. So starting out, thanks for having us here again this year. Really appreciate it. We're in the second day of session, which is going to be an interesting one. Normally, they kind of get their stride and start working into things. They started out day one here, and day 2, 3, 4, 5 with a slew of bills coming in, new intros, and I'm going to kind of give you guys a quick rundown on some of the questions that I've got so far. I did hear Commissioner Didier was concerned specifically about the WAC, the 246-100. That's specifically talking about basically imprisonment because somebody's sick. Interment, number one, what I'm hearing from most of the rural areas right now is that if this does end up in the meeting tomorrow, including they decide to bring in COVID-19 specifically in the definition, most of the rural sheriffs and police departments are saying, no, that's not going to happen. We're not going to do it. But I just don't know. I mean, I'm hearing things on both sides. It's not going to be as bad as they say it is, or it is going to be as bad. So we're going to just have to watch the meeting tomorrow and see what happens. There's obviously a lot of comment opposed to this one. So we'll see how it comes out. I'm getting a lot of questions also, specifically asking if there's going to be a bill or something talking about a check on the authority of the governor, specifically as it pertains to declaring a state of emergency. I think there is definitely, the talk is there's definitely going to be something to that effect. The question remains, how many D votes can they get to maybe pull something through? One of the factors in that is at the end of the session last year to get bills passed, specifically the budget, the Democrats and Republicans made a bunch of deals and did some horse trading, and the R's got some of the stuff they wanted in, and the D's had to let some stuff go. Well, when the governor signed all that stuff into law, he pretty much vetoed most, if not all, of those compromises that the Republican and Democratic leadership made in the House and the Senate, and really kind of flew in the face of the Republicans, and these D's, it kind of made it look like they're going back on their word. So there is some dissension in the ranks is what I'm getting at. So there's a possibility something like that may come through. The other thing, Benton County has a bill. It's 5514. It's talking about increasing the frequency of commissioner meetings outside of the county from quarterly to allowing it monthly. Something for you guys to consider. They are asking for some support on that. Most of the response that I've gotten from the other rural counties has been, well, it doesn't really affect us. It's more permissive, so we're okay with it. That's kind of just in general what I've seen. you guys can kind of talk that over and see what you might want to do. Even staying neutral would be fine, or yes or no. It's up to you guys. There's a micro trenching bill out there. As you guys have seen, there's the Federal Communications Commission has passed some rules specifically talking about 5G, Wi-Fi, wireless expansion. And this bill at 1722, it has a companion 5775 in the Senate. And what this bill does is it would compel a county or a city to allow a utility installer, specifically around broadband or Wi-Fi 5G stuff, to put a micro trench in, which means they're about 6 inches wide, no deeper than 12 inches, through the right-of-way. There are some exemptions. The state highways are exempted, and so there's some conflicts in this bill, you know, that kind of make you sit back and go, well, that doesn't really make sense. Especially in the rural areas, a lot of those 5G nodes are going to go on state or federal highways where the people are predominantly going through or around. We're not too terribly worried about it. Axle is working on this with WASAC, and they think they've got it to at least a point where it's not too onerous, but it's something we're going to keep an eye on. Just specifically, we just don't like being compelled to let somebody dig through our right-of-way where we don't have any say on it. There's another interesting bill coming through here. It's got a bill, it just got dropped, pre-filed, and got a bill number last night. It's 1933. And it's talking about allowing a city or a county to put a tax on cannabis producers. There were two versions of the Z draft, the pre-filed bill. One was the population threshold at 100,000 and one's population threshold at 50,000. I'm not sure which one got dropped. We'll know as soon as they populate that into the system. But if it is the greater one, it may be an opportunity for some, basically it's an excise tax collection on producers and processors, where currently the only tax is collected at retail. It's really designed with the intent of increasing or incentivizing local jurisdictions to allow for cannabis producers and processors. It's really not a huge deal, but it's definitely something to look at. Most of the treasurers, the nasty bill 1202 is back. That's the tax deferral, property tax deferral. Oh, I'm sorry, that's the wrong one. 1202 is civil remedies for police misconduct. That bill is being heard again here at 10 o'clock today. Pretty much nothing good there for us, especially out here in the rural areas. Again, it's one of those bills that was designed and written for the urban centers, and they really just don't understand what we're doing out in the rural areas. We're having enough trouble keeping police and sheriff from leaving anyway. You put civil liability on them, it's a pretty big concern. WASAC is working this one, basically coming in 100% opposed. If they do try and push it through, there's some compromises or not necessarily acceptable, but less damaging that they worked through last year. Those will probably come back around. This afternoon in Senate Ag at 1:30, there is a work session that quite a few of your constituents, I'm sure, will be very interested in. They are talking about country of origin labeling. It's basically a report, the Department of Agriculture, talking about country of origin labeling, and they are going over several other cattle issues. So it's probably something that, I'd recommend getting out there, letting your cattle producers and the cattlemen know if they don't already. They're going to talk about blue tongue disease in deer. They're going to go over the country of origin labeling standards for beef. They're going to go over livestock identification update. That's the brand inspection stuff. Electronic cattle transaction reporting system, and then the Commission on Pesticide Registration. They're just talking about changing the name on that commission. But those cattle bills, definitely something that will interest your people. Legislature, of course, is trying to sneak climate into everything they possibly can. Senate Bill 5626 is looking to incorporate climate resilience into water system plans. So certainly something that I would say you're going to want to keep an eye on as we're doing it. Obviously, any of that stuff is going to be the big associations are going after, but we'll keep an eye on it too. There is a new bill. It's a 911 bill, and it's 1703. And it basically talks about modernizing your 911 system, mostly because everybody has cell phones. They want to incorporate the GPS and the Wi-Fi and the broadband service, so it's not just a hardline call to 911. A lot of systems aren't up to date. There's, in the bill, we've got to see what they're going to do with it, but there is a section that would require each county to provide or participate in a county-wide or multi-county-wide 911 emergency system, which is not really any different than what you're doing now, but they would require you to participate in this. There is an out. You can ask for the state patrol to provide the service. They'd be a primary public service or a public safety answering point and receive 911 calls from specific geographical locations. You know, that there's been a lot of talk around that. You know, I mean, do you want to go into your locals? Do you want to go into the state patrol? We'll see how this bill develops, but it's something we're going to watch. The other one, the treasurer's bill, is 1410. That one specifically, it's that nasty one that defers the property taxes. So you wouldn't pay 2020 till the end of 2021, 2021 till 2022. This thing's back in full force, and pretty much everybody is up in arms about it. It didn't get a lot of traction last year. I'm not guessing that it's going to get a lot of traction this year, being that it's an election year. We're hoping that maybe some of these guys are going to realize that their seats might be in jeopardy. And the majorities are such that the Republicans literally don't even need to show up. The majority party can pretty much do almost everything they need without them. So there's no blaming one side or the other. If something happens that people don't like, it is just one side. And we're seeing, you know, they're revisiting the long-term care tax, long-term care act. And they basically realized that it was just a nightmare for implementation, had a bunch of holes in it. All the ones that we talked about and told them that were there last year. So they're going to pull that back and look at implementing it somehow differently and see what the negotiations end up on that. But I would love to say that they've learned something. It doesn't seem, though, as they have. So we're going to keep a close eye on this stuff, and there's, you know, as these bills come up, we have heard that they're going to stay hard on criminal justice, looking at the firearms stuff as well. You know, there's a group of bills here talking about, you know, specifically addressing firearms, where you can carry them, when you can carry them. Obviously, the sign-ins on those and the testimony is pretty prolific. So today, they're right now in the middle of going through the purchase of military equipment by law enforcement agencies, modifying the standard use of force, and standard use of physical force by peace and police officers. So they're still trying to go after that. Of course, these are the committees that are just packed full of people. So there's obviously a lot of opposition to this stuff. So we're keeping an eye on it. If you would like to comment on any of those, please let us know. And please do sign in and comment as well. With that, do you guys have any questions, comments, concerns, clarifications?
Questions,
anything
Commissioners?
specifically that you want us to look at?
Questions, Commissioners?
Yeah, Zach, this is Commissioner Peck. Couple
Yes,
things. Just a clarification on 5514. I think you unintentionally misspoke when you said it allows for out-of-county meetings. The change is actually to allow county boards to hold meetings outside of the county seat. And it's a bill that's really focused on Benton County so that they can hold more frequent meetings in Kennewick than they do in the county seat of Prosser. The same bill, which was passed a few years ago, already established the opportunity for joint meetings between, say, Benton and Franklin to happen outside of our county. So it's a minor distinction, but I thought it was worth noting that it's really to allow them to have more meetings in Kennewick where their population is more heavily centered.
Yes, that is correct. Thank you.
Second thing is that Senate Bill 5597 appears to be a substantial update and partial rewrite of the 2018 Washington Voting Rights Act bill, which of course is now law. So I would invite you to keep an eye on that one, since our county is presently in litigation under VRA compliance, and I anticipate this will impact other counties not too far down the line. The micro-trenching bill that you mentioned is roundly opposed by the engineering community. And that is a bill sponsored by Representative Benke out of the 8th District in Kennewick. For anyone who wants to follow up on that, 1722, that's the micro-trenching bill. And then for those interested in those firearms bills, they're 1618, 1630, and 5568. Thank you.
Commissioner
Yeah,
Mullen.
thank you for the clarification there.
Zach, this is Commissioner Mullen. Just a question on the Long-Term Care Act. Just exactly where do we stand right now with that?
They have introduced a bill, and from what I understand, there is a slew of amendments from both Democrat and Republican committee members. So who knows what they're going to hang on it, but there will be a change to it. As you know, the governor has asked to the Department of Revenue to not collect the taxes on that one until we get it figured out. So there will be changes. I mean, there's tons of amendments. We'll have to see what they pull into it. But, you know, the things they're addressing specifically are, you know, people working outside the state coming into the state, or people who are in the state who work both in and out of the state, and military personnel, and also the fact that you have to work the previous 3 years before you start drawing. It would be best if it just went away, but who knows what they're going to do. Like I said, there's a ton of amendments on it.
All right, thank you. And I just wanted to expand on the country of origin labeling, at least for cattle producers. I don't think most people are aware that your cattle can be shipped into the United States live, already slaughtered, actually already cut and wrapped. And as soon as you take the wrapping off and re-wrap it, that particular piece of meat is now considered a product of the United States. And that is very misleading to the general public. So just wanted to expand on that, but thank you for bringing that to our attention.
Zach,
Absolutely.
Zach, this is Commissioner Didier. I have a couple questions. Under the House Environment and Energy, they have a House Bill 1623 addressing the extent to which Washington residents are at risk of rolling blackouts and power supply inadequacy events. What's this bill all about?
So this bill specifically talks about extending the requirements for the Department of Commerce and the UTC to bring emergency resources adequacy meetings through the year 2029. Basically, it just requires them to have a bunch of meetings and talk about what to do in the case of an emergency if there are rolling blackouts, and it may require a new state policy for resource adequacy. And they want to try and put some incentives in there, you know, for the utility providers to make sure that they get power back on. Basically, what it means is that it's all talk.
Yeah, it looks like it's just about all talk, but obviously they're going to set the agenda for who gets canceled power first. And in this rich environment of power production here in Eastern Washington, I would know that we're at the disadvantage for leverage in Olympia, but we would not suffer any rolling blackout, brownout, whatever, because of we have enough production. Now, heading into the House Rural Development, Agricultural and Natural Resources, House Bill 1718, prohibiting activities related to the production and manufacturing of fur products. Is cattle producers, since hides are used off of cattle, are they underneath the scrutiny of House Bill 1718?
Well, that's a good question.
Well, you can look
Well,
at...
it prohibits fur farming. That's something, let me look into it.
They're always looking at an angle. They're always looking for an angle to get control of the cattle producers. And as far as the country of origin, I've been fighting this since our great Congressman Newhouse voted to retract the country of origin labeling for all of the foreign industries shipping into our country. And as Commissioner Mullen has stated, when those big ships come in from Argentina, Brazil, and China, they go on and inspect, and then I've heard they don't even have to unwrap and rewrap. They just put the USDA label on there. So the American consumer is not getting a honest choice at the grocery store of country of origin of the United States grown beef, and we need to really support our own producers. That's all I have, sir.
And well, there's hundreds of thousands of cattle coming across the border from Canada as well, and Canada can bring it in from who knows where, So, I mean, it's definitely something we need to pay attention to.
Okay, well, that's all I got. Thank you very much.
Zach, this Commissioner
Absolutely.
Peck, just one other clarification. On 1623, you said this was at least initially just meetings to talk about distribution of emergency resources in emergency situations. Is that right?
It is, and of course they're looking at this thing where they're talking about the Clean Energy Transformation Act as well. They're trying to sneak clean energy into a lot of this stuff and long-term planning. It all kind of goes back to that Paris Climate Accord. But the benefit of this one is they're really just talking about, this is a planning bill requiring that these different utilities and the UTC get together and start talking about, how they can make sure that they're not going to run out of power.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that clarification. Just a note for those listening. The power that we're blessed to have here locally off our hydro system, off of Columbia Generating Station and Nuclear Power Station, all of that is subscribed to Bonneville Power Administration, a federal agency. And so if this power is administratively managed and distributed, the fact that these producers are in our local community is going to have zero effect. It's going to be federal control through BPA, which I think is it's a concern for me. I don't know if it is for anybody else, but it bears watching. So I appreciate if you get any updates on this particular bill. If it looks like it's actually going to lead to a sort of a mid-session bill, somebody pops up, would sure like to know. Thanks.
Absolutely. All right. Well, with that, I should probably move on to the next one. I definitely appreciate your time. And as always, if you have any questions, comments, would like clarification on anything, please call or email anytime, and I'll be available.
Thank you, Zach.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Next on the agenda is the office business vouchers.
We have 2 vouchers before us today. Move for approval of fund expenditures in a total amount of $304,963.01 as presented, and note that it has been reviewed and signed by 2 representatives of the Auditor's Office and the County Administrator.
Second.
Been a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
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 Move for approval of salary clearing payroll and emergency management payroll in the total amount of $996,001.44 as presented, and note that it has been reviewed and signed by 2 representatives of the Auditor's Office.
Second.
There's been a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. With that, we'll move down to the consent agenda. There's items 1 through 4 today on the consent agenda.
Move for approval of consent agenda items 1 through 4. As
Second.
presented.
There's been a motion and a second for consent agenda items 1 through 4. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Now we'll move down to the Commissioner Administrator updates. Mr. Johnson, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a brief update for commissioners and the public participating in the meeting about some of the weather-related events we had last week. We had shut down the operations for non-essential employees at the courthouse for about a day and a half due to snow and slick roads. You'll all remember what happened a few years ago when we had a sudden melt and the damage that caused a lot of the county roads. We had a little bit of that, but not nearly the same impact. There was a little water on PK Highway for a period of time, a couple of small washouts and roads, but nothing really serious. So we kind of dodged that bullet this time. Obviously, that's a continuing concern, making sure that our roads are safe for our community. Within the last week, the U.S. Treasury issued its final rule on the ARPA funds. So I'm in the process of reviewing that final rule to make sure that our spending plans are in accordance with what the intent of the Congress and Treasury made available to us. Also working right now on some significant personnel matters with the replacement of our Public Works Director and our HR Director. Been in some interviews with candidates for those positions, and we'll continue those and bring some recommendations to the board for you to consider. Participate on the Wasatch call yesterday and a meeting with Benton County tomorrow regarding plans for the Juvenile Justice Center. It's going to be an important issue for us to deal with over the next couple of years.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Peck.
Greater Columbia Behavioral Health Board meeting last Thursday. We took care of some year-end administrative business. WASAC meeting on Friday was the first for this legislative session. I think I mentioned previously I'm serving as co-chair of the Legislative Steering Committee for the State Association of Counties, so that was last Friday, and there'll be one every Friday through the session. Had a notice from State Department of Commerce yesterday appointing me to the Washington State Aviation and Aeronautical Advisory Board. The purpose of that, the benefit of that, is to provide advice to DOT and to the legislature as to what we can do to support aviation industry and safety. Obviously, the Tri-Cities Airport here in Franklin County is a huge economic asset, so I see this as an opportunity to help identify their needs as well as other airports in the state and get legislative support for them. And then the same meeting yesterday with WASAC that Mr. Johnson spoke to.
Commissioner Mullen.
So I had a meeting with the Benton Franklin sit on the P&M committee meeting. We had discussion about replacement of the operations building at the Benton Franklin Transit. Also had discussion concerning over what happened at the Greater Columbia Behavioral Health. Apparently our contracts have been canceled with Lords. I've fielded several calls on that. I guess the question is who's going to take over these contracts. But I think more concerning than anything that there was no notice to cure, no explanation of why their contracts were canceled. And Lords has been providing services here in the Tri-Cities, or in Pasco, Franklin County, for over 40 years. I think they're owed an explanation, and I myself would like to know exactly what's going on. It just, it's something that does not sound right. But again, I don't have all the information on it, but it's very concerning. And also, I've had time to look over the redistricting maps and the recommendations. And I, again, would just like to say thank you to all who worked on the Redistricting Committee. It was a challenging task, to say the least. It required a great deal of time and effort to go through all the information and scrutiny, and everyone gave generously, and I would like to say thank you. Now that we have the information before us that was given by Dr. Morrison, the demographer, who is recognized as one of the most reputable in the nation and is considered an expert and the best in his field. Just want to say that his recommendation on the maps that were presented all came across is not recommended except for map 2. It was the only map that he recommended. You know, we took a lot of heat over bringing that map before the board. A lot of public scrutiny. I have no hidden agenda. I only want what's fair and equitable for all of the citizens of Franklin County. And I feel that I have always felt and still do feel that map 2 is fair and equal representation of all in Franklin County. I believe our system works and that it is fair and just. And is convoluted and all the information out there and that everybody has an opinion. I would just like to state again that map 2 was the only map that was presented that was...
Mr. Chairman, point of order.
So, anyways, that's my update for this week, and again, I just want to say thank you to all the people that worked on the Redistricting Committee. Thank you.
Point of order.
Mr. Mullen has moved on from advocacy, so I'll withdraw the point of order, but if he would care, I would be happy to provide some information on the Greater Columbia Behavioral Health contract that he spoke about. Your choice.
Yes, I would like to hear what's going on.
As I understand it, the termination was not for cause, therefore a notice to cure is not part of the process. It was a termination for convenience, which is a termination that is used in virtually all of the county contracts here in Franklin County. It's also used in GCBH and elsewhere. As to plans going forward, I would, and the action that was just taken, I would encourage you to perhaps speak with Mr. Quinn Bell, who is the contract legal advisor for GCBH. He's local, he's with Bell, Brown, and Rio, and he's expressed that he'd be happy to answer any questions you have about the process and about the termination of those contracts and any purpose or reason behind it. I agree with you that Lords has been a long-time provider and a valuable asset in Franklin County. I had the opportunity to vote on that measure and I abstained from it, and I specifically cited that Lords was a long-time partner with the county, and we have a number of other contracts with them, and chose to abstain from voting on that for that reason. There's a potential for a perceived conflict of interest. So that's where it's here. Is Mr. Charles Amron, who is a county commissioner in Columbia County, is the chair of the GCBH board. AMMERIN, I believe it is, Charles. And he's the chair of that committee, and then Mr. Bell is the legal counsel. And between them, I'm sure they can answer any other questions.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, I'll go down my short list here. I only had one meeting. It was the Ben Franklin Operation and Maintenance, and in there they proposed a destruction of their building and rebuild of the building of close to $17 million. And it was just it was a statement, not an action item, and we're going to have our Ben Franklin Transit meeting this Thursday. I'd encourage everyone to participate and be on virtual or come in person. I think we still are virtual, aren't we, Commissioner Mullen? We're still virtual. We're not.
As to
We
my
had one
knowledge,
live meeting in the last year, right?
that is correct.
Yeah. Okay, with that also, I had numerous phone calls still on the assessor's office, and so I encourage anybody that has any questions about their taxes or tax bill, that we have a meeting tonight at 7 o'clock, that our assessor will be there to answer any questions, and that address is 12901 Glade North Road. If you so choose to want to meet with your assessor, he'll be there. We also will have Monty, our sheriff's assistant, at the meeting to answer any questions on the state health board discussion item of tomorrow. And I hope my other commissioners sent in a letter. It had to be in by Friday. I sent in a letter to the Washington State Board of Health on the WACs of 246-100-070, 246-100-045, 246-100-040, and 246-100 and 246-105. 105 is adding COVID to the vaccine chart for schools. So that means every child would be getting the vaccine for COVID. Very important. And tomorrow is that meeting over in Olympia. And I believe it starts at 9 and it goes through to 3:30. They only have a 50-minute comment period, and they had 3,597 pages of emails sent to them. So the public is well aware of what's going on, and they're engaged. Thank God. With that, we'll move on down to public comment. If there's anybody on the phone, we have two callers on the phone. We'll take those first, and if there's anybody in the audience, please, we'll take the callers on the phone, and then we'll go to the audience.
Good morning, Dr. Garcia.
Yes, the vaccine.
You have the floor for 3 minutes, please.
3 minutes, okay.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Oh, it's not live?
Yeah, you're live. There's about a 30-second delay from live to your feed.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, please go ahead with your public comment.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, good morning, Commissioners. Thank you for letting me speak on this section. I do want to bring up the issue of the Greater Columbia Behavioral Health and the termination of the contract with Lourdes Medical Center. I would come here to ask the Commissioners to investigate this further, because I don't think that this was done in the good nature and fairness that Lourdes Medical Center deserved. There were a lot of untruths about meetings, happenings that were related to the board, which were just did not happen. This really hurts Lourdes Medical Center, and there are reasons to believe that this was purposely done in that sense. And for the Commissioners of this county to defend the only hospital that we have and has served the community for so many years, I think that this is an easy decision for you guys to please investigate this further, at the very least, to find the real reasons and the ulterior motives for this termination that really hurts our only hospital in Franklin County. I believe that the CEO of Lourdes is online to speak with you guys as well, so I won't take more time, but I believe that this is something that is really important to our county and that should not be taken lightly. In that sense, and for the Commissioners of this county to defend the only hospital that we have
Thank you, Dr. Garcia.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, is this Joan?
Yes.
Joan, you have the floor for 3 minutes, please. You'll need to turn your device off so that you don't get that feedback.
Okay.
Thank you. Go ahead.
So, hello, can you all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead, please.
Hi, my name is Joan White-Wagner, and I am the new CEO here at Lourdes Medical Center. And I do, like Dr. Garcia, appreciate taking the time. I received a termination notice for both of our contracts for GCBH on Thursday afternoon. And this is for our Medicaid and non-Medicaid services that we provide for the Tri-Cities community in terms of behavioral health. The reason stated in the letter signed by a commissioner that chairs the executive committee outside of these counties stated that they were going in a different direction for behavioral health services in the area. The only contact that I have had regarding anything with GCBH was in November, toward the end of November, and it only concerned crisis services. No other services, and that was after some other things had occurred with 2 employees who left us and went to work at GCBH. So like Dr. Garcia stated, I think that the committee and the executive board was misled in the in terms of us not meeting the obligations of any of the contracts. And I don't think that this was done above board. So I am sincerely requesting that the commissioners further investigate. I have not, prior to November, between May when I arrived and November, I had not had any communication with GCBH in terms of not meeting or adhering or following any guidelines of either contract, both the Medicaid and non-Medicaid. These 2 contracts represent payment for approximately 80 to 85% of our services at LCC. And it will greatly hinder our services there. And so for the good of the community, I am sincerely requesting that the commissioners get the truth regarding this and investigate fully.
Okay, thank you for your comment.
Is that it, Keith?
Yes.
Okay, so is there anybody in the audience? Please come to the mic.
I will save my redistricting comments for the open hearing thing. But I do want to remind you folks that once again, 2 of you are not wearing masks. And I don't bring this up because I'm a Debbie Downer or because I take some sick thrill from it. I hate these masks. I plan on burning this when the pandemic is over in a huge bonfire. But the reality is, if you're not wearing masks and there's no justification, I have to question the legality of every meeting we are holding. What happens if a citizen gets a lawyer and decides to question the legality of these meetings? Does that undo all of the work you've done, for better or worse? What kind of liability do we as a county face when we don't enforce these mandates? There's always someone out there who's got enough time and money to get a lawyer. I don't want my county facing legal liability because you refuse to wear a mask or provide actual documentation about why you should be exempt from wearing a mask. And the second thing I would point out is that while I do appreciate the hard work that our legislative advisor people are doing, as someone who identifies as a Democrat, it is fascinating to me when I hear that someone my tax dollars may or may not be going to, that my county government is relying on making weird comments about the Democratic Party. We don't need it. Just tell us what bills you're advocating and why. There's also a House bill I didn't hear him mention known as 1750 that I suspect is going to have rather interesting ramifications for the economy in our county if it gets passed, and is probably going to provoke a great deal of tension. It has to do with empowering employers of agricultural workers to pick 12 weeks out of a year, any 12 weeks that they want to, where they don't have to pay overtime until someone has gone over 50 hours. Now, I don't claim to be an expert, and I'm interested in learning more about it myself, but I do think that that is a bill that has the potential to become very divisive, very controversial, and we would be fools at every level of government in Franklin County if we aren't watching that thing like a hawk. And finally, again, this county is special. This county is one of the best places you could live, and it is concerning when we do anything that has the potential to boomerang on us, creating any kind of liability that could get us sued or cost us tax dollars that we legitimately don't have when we are stretched to the limit on our budget. So I ask you, please, for the love of God, either provide the adequate documentation to demonstrate why you don't have to wear the masks, or wear the damn masks. And please also enforce it in the audience, because if you're not enforcing it in the audience, that also poses a potential liability to all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'll ask you to refrain from using any swear words when you're at the mic. Thank you very much. Anybody else public comment?
Good morning, Commissioners. I wanted to have comment on a couple of things that two of you Commissioners said. First, Mr. Peck, when concerning our generating powers here locally and keeping some of that representation and voice local, I appreciate that, and please continue to be a part of that, as there's possibility of there being some new nuclear power come out of our area. To have our resources locally used, yet have no control or representation here locally, I think is wrong. As Commissioner Peck pointed out, I think that keeping a close eye on that would be advantageous for us and your representation of the people in Franklin County. So thank you for that. As well as the cool labeling, Commissioner Mullen, you pointed that out. That's something that's concerned me as a cattle producer for a long time. That in fact what you said is correct. They literally can take it out of one bag and put it in another bag, and it somehow magically becomes a U.S. produced product, and that's wrong. Country of origin labeling needs to be true and correct. We are being fed in today's environment a bill of goods that is not in fact true in a lot of cases. When we're told that our hospitals are overrun and at capacity, they're not in fact overrun and at capacity. They are at the capacity that the staff is able to provide service for. So when we hear the media say that our hospitals are overrun, what's actually happening is the building is not too small. We have a staffing problem. And I think it's that we need to be really careful to point out the truth when we see it. And country of origin labeling is one of those areas where that those of us that are cattle producers that are being cheated by what is supposed to supposedly help us. Country of origin labeling is supposed to help us, but it actually is detrimental in many areas, because you bring it across from our northern border, or you ship it over and you switch the bag that it comes in, and somehow that's supposed to help us is false and very misleading. Last thing I wanted to share is I did hear about this canceling the contract with Lourdes Medical Center, and that is concerning. As our only local hospital, some of our neighboring hospitals across the river have been growing rapidly and increasing in services, and it seems like that has been being taken away from Lourdes Medical Center in many areas, and would encourage you to look into that and to consider carefully the ramifications. Two disgruntled employees causing contracts to be canceled at our local hospital, I think is unfortunate, and would encourage you to look into it. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment? Do you have another phone call, Keith?
Oh, yes, looks like I do. Good morning, Michelle.
Good morning. Thank you for taking my comments. I appreciate the local aspect about nuclear power. I would advocate and ask my commissioners to get training on NEPA. Very important, because then you know your rights as a county and you have a check and balance on the state and federal. And I know this may be offensive to you, but that is where we fell down on the Snake River Dam. When we have a Vista coming down, they were almost purchased by Canada and became a Canadian-owned company. Now, Canada could sell it to anybody. And so when we marshal our energy and our powers through the various counties that do have legal checks and balances on the processes, including the Snake River dams, and there was a comment made that we weren't going to carry the water for Darrell Oakland and those folks. The fact of the matter is we don't have NEPA training in our county commissioners. So I am very happy to see that you guys work together and got a mental health tax that serves our county. I love it when you work together. I truly do. But I advocate that if you're going to work on these matters, you get NEPA training. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Anybody else on the phone?
No.
Anybody else in the audience? Seeing no other public comment, we'll move down to the next item on the agenda, which is the open public meeting, which has still been open. Keith, have we received any emails or any text of any kind for discussion?
I don't believe so.
On the open public meeting on redistricting map. And we are going to be joined by our demographer, correct?
Peter, are you on the phone?
I'm on the phone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, I'm here.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Let's make sure that he get that mic down there so everybody can hear Peter. And at this point in time, we're still open from the last meeting. And is there any comment by the commissioners?
Mr. Morrison, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. I just want to make sure I didn't hang up on you. Thank you.
Is there any comments or discussion by the commissioners before I open it up to the public? So with that, is there anybody that would like to comment on this from the public? Or maybe I should ask our demographer if he would like to present first.
I'd be happy to just give you a very quick overview, and I'd like to focus on basically the chosen plan option 2 and also the alternative plan option 2A. And I just wanted to be sure you understood that these are virtually identical plans. They differ in a very subtle way that is designed to address either of two scenarios that I could envision, looking at it from the perspective of a plaintiff, which would be, are you delivering to the plaintiff an assured Hispanic control district now, as best as one can tell, as opposed to a slightly different perspective, which is, we know there will be a Hispanic control district by the time we have the next election, but have you taken a step toward promoting a Hispanic influence district? And I would say that it's a toss, from my standpoint, it's a toss-up. Either plan is one that I would recommend, and I would recommend both of them for essentially the same reasons, with only very slight difference, with a tilt toward a long-term future of a potential Hispanic influence district that materializes in in one of the districts that's now in place, District 1.
Thank you.
And I'm happy to take any questions you have.
Thank you, Mr. Morrison. Is there questions from the commissioners?
My question would be, of the maps presented, I just want to make it clear, is map 2, is that the only map that is recommended? And what is the recommendation on the remaining maps?
Map option 2 and 2A are both, as I say, virtually identical, and I would recommend either one of them with equal praise. Options 1, 3, and 4 are options that I would not recommend, and I would not recommend them for essentially the same reason that I would not recommend the UCLA plaintiff's proposed plan, which is that the options 1, 3, and 4 are flawed by the existence of packing and cracking, which constitutes a red flag from the standpoint of the Federal Voting Rights Act.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Morrison, the difference between map 2 and 2A is precinct 59 and precinct 11, moving from one area to one district to another. And in 2A, it lowers the Latino population down to 49% instead of 49.9. Are we too close at 49.9% of American Community Survey for that to fly in the court's eye, or would it still be sufficient as far as packing at 49.9?
These plans, there's nothing regarding packing or cracking in either option 2 or 2A. The subtle difference is what I can say I know with what confidence as of the beginning of 2022 based on data that are vintage 2019, and that is the American Community Survey data. And I would suggest that with either option, I would say with varying degrees of high confidence, ranging from high to very high, that District 2 is going to have reached a majority by the time you hold the next election, which is sometime beyond today. So as long as you're holding an election in 2022, any reasonable person looking at these numbers who understands what they measure would say that Latinos have either unquestioned control or almost certain control, depending on which option you're talking about, in District 2. And that's all that matters. And the other consideration is that there is a tilt given insofar as possible, given the geography, to a District 1 in which Latinos are concentrated insofar as possible, up to a level of 31% in option 2, but 32.4% in option 2A, which means that by the time you hold your next election, it's very likely that Latinos will have begun to emerge as the most influential group within District 1, and whose influence inexorably will increase over time for demographic reasons. And so that subtle difference between option 2 and 2A is one that a plaintiff might look at and say, I'd rather have 2A than 2. On the other hand, they might just as well say, I'd rather have 2 rather than 2A for a slightly different mix of reasons. So either way, I think you're very close to some hypothetical upper limit here on concentrating Latinos given today's demography. And I would challenge plaintiffs to come up with a plan that they would find preferable to either one of these options.
With that being said, option 2A at 32.4 and the progression of voters coming into play, wouldn't it suffice to say that it'd be better to keep our election system as a primary district and county at large general would also benefit the Latino population?
There's a simple way to envision that if what you're saying is have a primary by district and then a final election at large. The way I look at this, again, I'm looking at it not from the standpoint of the geography of a map, but just the simple table. If you take either of these options and then just scan down below lines, District 1, 2, and 3 to the county total, if you are holding an election at large, that is, for all practical purposes, equivalent to, I should say, from a demographic standpoint, that is equivalent to holding an election in a district that has 34.9% Latino in either option, and 34.9% would immediately look like an election that was diluting Latinos' votes relative to what could have been, which would be the 49 or 49.9% in District 2. So comparing District 2 with the county total creates, in my judgment, a red flag that would immediately call into question, or would immediately create a circumstance in which a plaintiff would look at this and say, you are holding an election in a fashion that dilutes Latinos' votes. And I don't think there's any doubt about that. That's the problem, that's the insurmountable problem that would happen if either of these plans were used in anything other than district-only elections.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Morrison, Commissioner Peck, a couple of questions.
Go ahead.
Are there any of these maps that you believe would survive scrutiny in an at-large election scenario?
No.
Okay. Your assessment of the percentage of eligible Latin Hispanic voters, I take that is the last column in your table under the ACS estimated numbers, and those numbers I believe are from 2019. Is that all correct?
That is correct, and those are the latest new data I was able to incorporate.
Okay. Okay, thank you. So is it accurate, my understanding accurate, that your projections and your recommendations are based on what you perceive or believe will be an increase in the percentage of Hispanic eligible voters, that last column, over the 2 years since 2019 when these data were procured, and now seems to be the basis for your confidence that these would stand today. And so with that as the premise, my real question is, what basis are we using to believe that that population of eligible Hispanic voters from 2019 is in fact increasing? Are you escalating the age demographics from the 2019 population? in recognizing a number of 16 and 17-year-olds are becoming 18 and therefore eligible voters?
That's exactly what that's exactly the basis for my premise that the upward trend, however gradual, in the percent Hispanic is going to increase over time. I have actually seen this. I've seen this circumstance in a number of other instances where there have been plans in areas where the Latino population has a substantial proportion of adults who are not yet citizens, but the under 18 population is always got a higher percentage who are native born. And so through the sheer progression of cohorts, 17-year-olds turning 18 every year, you get an infusion of predominantly citizen Latinos added to the voting age to the citizen voting age population, and that inexorably drives up the proportion that Hispanics constitute of eligible voters. So it's not a guess, it's not an extrapolation. It is really a working through of a model whereby a predominantly citizen population under 18 enters the voting ages and gradually elevates the overall Hispanic share of eligible voters. If you can envision that, it's simple cohort progression.
Sure, that makes sense. And so is it a fair representation of your previous remarks today that option 2A potentially likely accelerates the timeline for when we would have 2 districts in Franklin County that are majority or close to, well, it would accelerate the timeline to when we have 2 districts that are majority eligible Hispanic voters. So we'd have 2 majority Hispanic voter districts. I'm trying to not mischaracterize or put words in your mouth, but does that somehow 2A accelerate the day which we get to 2 majority Hispanic districts?
Let me put it this way. I'm not at all sure that there will eventually be 2 majority Hispanic districts, but if you start with the premise that such a future will occur, then Plan 2A would probably put you maybe 2 years ahead of time in that happening. That said, I would say the most significant observation now is that it will accelerate the evolution of an Hispanic influence district along the way, whether or not the influence district ever attains majority status.
Okay, and last question, and this is both question and observation. It appears, this is the observation part, that the majority of our growth in raw population is happening in districts 1 and 3. And I'm curious if we have any data that give us insight as to the ethnic breakout of the incoming population in those districts. Being as those are our greatest growth numbers, it would matter whether 10% of that incoming population was eligible Hispanic voters or 90% of that incoming population was eligible Hispanic voters. So that seems to be a substantial variable that's not addressed here, and I'm guessing because we simply don't have that level of detailed data on that incoming population.
That's correct, and I would also say, in addition, that your judgment as to what the future holds is more informed than mine is. There are all sorts of ways in which I could speculate, but in that respect, I'm really kind of like the man from Mars. Obviously that's where the growth is going to be. And the question is, are you going to see an evolution of Latinos who, in essence, suburbanize and move outward into other parts of the county? Or are you going to see those areas evolve in some different way? I have no expertise to bring to that, to that issue.
So, generally speaking, and this is my last question here, generally speaking, option 2 versus option 2A, option 2 would logically give plaintiffs a somewhat higher degree of confidence in having a majority eligible Hispanic voter district in District 2 than would option 2A, even though we've already discussed the likely escalation of those percentages and the fact that both of them are likely over 50% now. Looking at it from acceptability for all parties, the county and plaintiffs both, would it seem logical that option 2 might be slightly preferable or somewhat preferable over 2A?
I would say if you're dealing with a plaintiff who might be looking at this with the narrowest view, 49.9 rounds up to 50, but 49.0 doesn't, I want the 49.9, then it's probably the surest plan, that is to say option 2 is the surest version that should satisfy both a plaintiff with a narrow focus on numbers and a Department of Justice, U.S. DOJ person with a narrow focus on numbers who doesn't appreciate the significance of what might lie ahead 5 or 10 years from now in terms of an Hispanic influence district. So for that reason, if somebody said, which one would you choose as the safest bet, given that both of them are leading in the same direction, I would say option 2 is your best bet.
Okay, thank you.
Well, Mr. Morrison, I've got a couple more questions, and this is for the future of Franklin County. If we, in any of these districts, get too high in the future of percentages, do we then need to readjust in the 4th year when we have to redistrict? And the same goes for the county, and what percent of the county justifies a majority? Is it 49% once the Latino population reaches 49%? And at that point in time, if we go at this time to district only primary and general, do we then move back to a district only primary, general at large?
What I can say is the only obligation you have, as I understand it, from the Federal Voting Rights Act is you don't have to redistrict until 2030. This is designed to last for 10 years. Now, what may happen, let's just say for the sake of hypothetical, suppose that you take the 2030 census and it shows that by that point in time, Latinos have increased from 34.9% of the entire county's eligible voters to 50.1%, so that you could say the entire county itself is majority Latino among eligible voters. I'm thinking as a layperson that you would be able to say, well, we no longer need to have elections by district because Latinos are the majority at the county level. And an at-large election will afford them control of, I should say, will enable them to elect candidates of their choice at large or by district. And so either one should be acceptable to DOJ according to what the lawyers would say. So that's a scenario that might unfold.
Thank you. And I've just got to say that Franklin County is on a growth spurt here where we are bringing in major players and which will create more growth. And I can tell you that we will be out of compliance probably within a year or two as far as district populations of like-mindedness. So we are going to be looking at this in another 4 years. I know we have to wait 4 years, but I think in the fourth year we're going to be looking at redistricting again at the population growth that is projected to occur.
Let me just say one thing on that point. I'm not sure what the circumstances are where you say this is a county that's having explosive growth. We're going to be way out of compliance in terms of districts no longer having equal total populations. I think that you are entitled to say we want to redistrict now because we're no longer, it's obvious that we're no longer anywhere near one person, one vote. And under those circumstances, the dilemma you have is that you don't have any decennial census to work with. But I know that there have been instances where locales have adjusted their boundaries based upon population estimates, and your state of Washington has got a solid analytic shop in there. I'm not sure what the name of it is, but they do a good job estimating local population. So that's at least a hypothetical possibility. But normally, this is dictated by the decennial census, and the 10-year period is kind of what we go with. You may be way out of line by the time 2025 rolls around, but there's nobody from the Department of Justice who's going to come after you and say you're out of compliance.
Thank you very much.
So Dr. Morrison, a couple observations on your last comments there. First is that population growth does not necessarily equal imbalance between districts. It depends on what districts those incoming populations choose to live in. Second is that there are organizations that routinely draw public information from Department of Motor Vehicles to analyze the zip codes of incoming people who are turning in their driver's licenses from other states and taking on Washington driver's licenses, and those zip codes give some clarity as to where these populations that are incoming are actually arriving from. And at least the last time I looked at these data, it was the Bay Area of California, it was the western side of Washington, and it was Boise, Idaho. I don't know that any of those are identifiable or inherently one particular racial background or another ethnic background. So the incoming population, it's hard to predict where they might move. Second observation I'd make is that, as you alluded, Washington has a very good demographic division in Olympia. They give updates on estimated population each year following a census, and 9 years after the 2010 census, I think it was in 2019, they gave projections for our population, and the most recent ones prior to the 2020 census, as I recall, they were off from the actual census count by 12, and not 12%, but 12 bodies. So your observation that Washington has a really good department for doing that is spot on. All that said, we can redistrict under Washington law every 4 years if we need to or choose to. So I think those are all factors that are worth consideration, and I'm inclined to think that satisfying to some degree the challenges under the pending litigation is an important consideration as well. Lastly, appreciate your work on this. These data are, I think, key to us being able to make informed decisions, while map 2 visually gives the impression of dilution. The statistics you provided show just the opposite, and so I'm far more comfortable with 2 now even than I was before based on these data, so thank you for your work.
You're welcome.
All righty. Well, with that, is there any other questions, Commissioner Mullen, for Mr. Morrison?
I have no other questions.
So, go ahead, Keith.
I have one caller whenever you're ready.
Go ahead. Maybe they'll bring up a question that we may need to ask Mr. Morrison about. And public comment right after this call.
Mr. Follansbee?
Yes.
Good morning. You have the floor for 3 minutes, please.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Jim Follansbee. I was a proponent, and still am a proponent of option 4, 3 vertical districts. There were some corrections that should be made within that one to even out the population so that they're a little closer than they are on the map, the current map for district option 4. But it's easy enough to correct those things by moving the line slightly in the vicinity of the city of Pasco, just a little bit east, a little bit west, to correct that. I'm concerned, however, that we did not have, the public was not really informed of the demographic considerations of all these things, and finally we got some information that the stenographer had proposed, but it was really late in the consideration and for public input. And I'd like to express my opinion that the commissioners really think about option 4 as well as option 2. Option 4 has a lot more flexibility, especially as we go into the future. And I think the little imbalances that we need to make are easily corrected there, where option 2 does not. That's my opinion. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you.
No other calls, Mr. Johnson? Okay, is there anybody in the audience? Please come forward.
Good to be back up here. So first of all, I would like to thank the demographer for that very thorough presentation. It was very informative. I strongly disagree with him on the definition of packing, and honestly, I don't think that this map is going to survive in court. I just don't. I think it minimizes the people of Pasco, where 80% of the population, regardless of the question about racial representation, we do deserve 2 fully self-contained districts, and I think that that's just the fact. I think there are a lot more standards that it sounded like our demographer may not be aware of that are in the Washington State Voting Rights Act than the Federal Voting Rights Act, and I'd be very curious to have a conversation with him privately to see what his understanding is specifically of the provisions of the Washington State Voting Rights Act and how it might differ from my own. I'm always happy to learn. But the reality is, I think that the plaintiff's map is probably the closest thing to what we are ultimately going to get when a court decides this issue. I'm not going to muse over the motivations of the commissioners because I don't like it when someone muses over my personal motivations either. But I am going to say this, whatever reason you have for supporting this and for fighting this process and for throwing out your own legal counsel's advice when this whole thing started, saying that you weren't in compliance with the law, that a map that looked surprisingly like that one, the one we have now, was wrong. Whatever your motivations are, I have to urge you to remember that the result is probably inevitable. We're on the same course Yakima was, we're going to rack up the same bills, and if we're really, really lucky, we might do the entire state a service by going to the state Supreme Court and having them issue a general ruling that affects every single county that will allow no other county to have to go through this ever again. Maybe that will be the one good thing, but the reality is, as Felix Vargas told you when he was commenting, you're headed for a train wreck. I am so sorry that this is the group of the commissioners that's about to experience the sinking of the Titanic or the crashing of a train. But if you continue on your current course, you've provided no justification for this map. And honestly, we'll see what the court does. Go with God, I guess. Thank you.
Thank you for your opinion. Any other public comment?
Good morning, Commissioners, again. I would like to very boldly and publicly say that I'm thankful that we have the process that we have, and that we don't just, when we're going through a tough decision-making process, that we don't just go to the state Supreme Court and have them make all of our decisions for us. This is the process of our system of governance, is for there to be pulling and pushing and a wrestling of ideas, and I'm thankful for the process. I am, however, disappointed that it took this long to get some of this information, as Mr. Follansbee pointed out. The information that we got at the last night meeting, approximately the last night meeting, I think would have been helpful through this process. Having been at each and every one of the public meetings that had to do with this process, it would have been helpful to have this. This is, in my unscientific opinion, that there are about 95% of the opinions that were expressed would have been different had we had that information. And so I'm thankful that we have it now, disappointed that we didn't have it earlier. And as we go through this process, I appreciate what the doctor, the demographer, had to say and share with us and explain. Information is power, education is power, and I'm thankful that while it took a while, that we finally have gotten to this point, and encourage you to carefully consider. And I'm excited that we're at the point we are now, where it appears that we're making educated and direct progress on this redistricting process. And I am certainly not as scared of what the court may or may not do. I think in good faith we're going through the process as we understand it, and wrestling with ideas along the way, and I think that that's healthy in our system of government. Thank you.
Thank you.
George Dockstetter, Pasco. I sat on the Redistricting Committee and basically met for almost 5 months, coming up with ideas, listened to public comment, public hearings, or public meetings, whatever you want to call it, to finally come up with a series of maps to be presented to the county commissioners and the demographer. It just takes time to get these things done, to come up with a solution. And now the decision time is yours to decide which one you want to present and vote on and go forward. We have the information to back us up in court. If the lawsuit wants to continue, to come up with a better plan where the demographer can say, no, that's a better idea, or it's worse. The one thing personally I'd like to say, on the district-only voting, that's fine in the primaries, but in the general, I would like to see at large, because I feel that if it's district-only in the general election, then there's only going to be one of the 3 county commissioners that are going to listen to what I have to say, or Steve Bauman, or Loopy, or anybody else that wants to come up and talk, because they don't have to worry about me because I'm not in their district. And I would like to see general at large. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else for public comment?
Good Good morning, Commissioners. Lupe Cardenas, a member of the committee. Is Mr. Peter still on the phone?
Yes, I am.
Mr. Morris.
Thank you for helping us on the past, but I have a couple questions. You mentioned that you used some of the data for 2019, so I thought when you made the presentation to us, you will use the 2020 data from the census. Is that your
yes,
answer?
I've used it.
Go ahead.
Did you want an answer?
Yes. Yes.
Yes, the total population column on the left of each table is based on the 2020 census. That is the official data that we use for equalizing districts on total population. The 2020 census also gives us the official count of persons 18 and over and the percentage of all those voting age persons who are Hispanic. What it does not tell us is what percentage Hispanics constitute of the 18 and over persons who are citizens. And my concern in this case is that there is a significant proportion of adults who are not yet citizens. And so it's an error for me to use the 18 and over population as a whole without taking account of the citizen component within it. The problem is that the 2020 census does not measure citizens separately. The Census Bureau has a separate data element, which is the American Community Survey, and that's a sample survey that they run continuously, and they have not issued the latest data for 2020. The latest data they've issued are for 2019, and that's what I show in the right-hand column. And if you want to see what a difference it makes, just compare that bottom line for the percent Hispanic ACS estimate, which is 34.9%, which means that only 34.9% of Hispanic adults only Hispanic adults constitute only 34.9% of eligible voters. And that's a lot lower than the 48.1% of the Hispanic share of all persons 18 and over. And so I'm using that ACS data to get a realistic picture of adults who are Hispanic and in today's world are eligible to vote. That's why I say I'm using the very latest data that are available from the census and also from other data sources from the Census Bureau.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. One of the things I want to ask you, you mentioned to us before that we could vary the numbers and use to our favor, or the county can use things to our favor, which would be up to 5%. So we don't have to be equally, if we try to take population shifting here on the future into account, so we could make this new districts a little differently, more population one way, because trying to do that. So you mentioned at that time, correct, that you use the 5% deviation if we needed to. Was that your observation yet?
Yes, it's always the case that total population column on the left, the ideal total population right down to the last person, exactly 1/3 of the 96,749 that you see at the bottom. It doesn't have to be exactly 1/3. It can be 5% more than it should be or 5% less. And that's latitude that the county is offered by the law so that you can take advantage of things that you know about the population that might make it a better plan. In this case, I will say that I have taken maximum advantage of that latitude to assure that Hispanics constitute the largest share that I could get in at least one district. That's how I basically cranked it up to 49.9% in District 2 of Option 2. I use the latitude to do that by saying I can adjust the total population plus or minus 5% in the districts to take in every single census block that I want to have in District 2 as the one that will strengthen Hispanics in District 2. So that's how the design of a plan comes about.
Okay. I guess thank you for that information. I appreciate your help here and also on our committee meeting. The only thing I have to say for the record here, I wasn't aware of the option 2A, and I haven't seen it. I don't have the demographics you're talking about a little bit about, so that's kind of interesting. I guess maybe you got more information, but it would have been helpful, like Mr. James called, to have that information, or Steve mentioned, would have been helpful to have that for the public. So on my other question, I guess, is I'm not sure if you guys happen to pick for districts or only voting today, or just we're picking maps or using maps. So if you don't have to do that, the choosing what voting, or how would say, district and at large, I would say if you don't have to touch them, leave it as it is. So that's the only thing. And thank you for your guys' time, and thank you, Keith, for the help. Also, I guess I forgot to mention in the past, helping the committee definitely helps. So, again, thank you.
As far as clarity on 2A, that was Mr. Morrison's suggestion to us. He is the one that created 2A as a variance to 2.
Okay, so I guess I'm going to say that the public needed to know that. The public needs to have it. I guess that's kind of interesting, at least with them. I know what I said before. He mentioned to us that we can move, and Michael is able to help move few that, like we're talking about, capital precincts to make these maps better. So you're to the point that you can choose A, or 2A, or 2, and or you can move a little bit, and it'll fit to the percentage that he needs. So to the 49, you can throw it to almost 50 or 51, but I think it's fairly close. And I think those two choices, like Mr. Peck mentioned, it can be easily done. So without having to, and Michael, I know, has some data that can do that. I mean, he's able to help us in the past anyway, so I went in the committee, so.
Thank you. Is there anybody else for public comment? Anybody on the phone, Keith? Oh.
I have a quick question for Dr. Morrison. You've on numerous occasions referenced a 5% margin, and I understand and agree that courts would likely give some latitude and not expect districts to be precisely equal, but in Washington, under RCW 29A 7610, subparens A, reading verbatim, each internal director, council, or commissioner district shall be nearly equal in population as possible. So I'm not taking issue that 5% might not be acceptable to the courts. I'm just reading what the law actually says. They should be as equal as possible. That probably varies from state to state, and Doctor, I realize you're doing this kind of work in many states, so thought I'd tell you what Washington statute says.
Could I just make a little clarification on that?
Please.
It sounds like your state law is closely aligned with the way it's worded in the federal law, which is I think it is, as equal as substantially equal as possible. And the way the federal law has come to be interpreted, and I'm speaking here I'm not a lawyer, but the way it seems to have been interpreted in case law is if you keep the total deviation under that plus or minus 5%, you don't need to explain, you don't need to justify it. It's like, you're home free. If it's over that plus or minus 5%, you can do it, but you have to explain why you did it. And in some jurisdictions, the explanation is that there was a great big mountain range that we had to get around, or there was a river we had to cross. I mean, there was a natural barrier. But in this instance, I don't have to explain why, or you don't have to explain to anybody why it deviates by plus or minus 5%. My explanation to you for why there is a deviation is because I gave high priority to achieving as high a share of Hispanic eligible voters as possible in one district in order to assure the Department of Justice that whatever is possible here, I'm very close to, if not at, the upper limit of that share, which is the 49.9%. So I'm on record as saying this plan ought to be one that any plaintiff that was thinking of suing you would look at and say, this is the plan that we always wanted. We didn't achieve it, but he did. So we have no complaint. We have no quarrel with it.
Yeah.
That's what I was giving priority to.
Okay, I appreciate that. I'll just close this line of discussion on this observation, which is that I preface my remarks by saying I don't suspect that a court or a plaintiff would necessarily have a real heartburn with us being within 5%. But I would also note that the states do have authority to construct these things more tightly than the federal law. The state's got to comply with the federal, but it doesn't say that the state law can't be even more constrained, and I think that's what's happening here. But in any case, I think it's probably not worth spending more time on. 5%, I think, would pass muster with most people. Thanks.
So, Mr. Morrison, we got our attorney, Sean Sant, at the mic. Sean, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to kind of circle back. I think we've heard from everybody that's present here in the audience. I just wanted, before the board may take action, just understand what options are available to the board, or at least maybe a recommended path. The board took a vote in order to do redistricting and took one map out of the collection of maps that were presented to the board as required before December 31st. That process, as I identified at our last public meeting at the HAPO Center, was just the start of a process. This could be an ongoing interaction. A couple of the options the board can consider today. Now that demographic data has been provided, we've had an initial public discussion where demographic data has been provided not just on the board initiated or the board recommended map of map 2, but the demographer provided the demographic data for maps 1 through 4 for consideration. If the board wanted to, after the discussion today, after the recommendations, after having heard public input from the meeting, the last public meeting, since that option 2 was put forward, the board would be able to go ahead and adopt that officially as the chosen map. The board would also have the option, because there has been additional discussion, and I think a lot of the points were well taken from participants that were on the Redistricting Committee. And I think another option that the board could do is, now with the demographic data, we've had that available here. The board could further distribute or publish that information, publish it with the board preferred map. If the board does want to change and go from option 2 to option 2A after considering public comment as well as the demographer's comment, then we would necessarily need to now publish 2A as the option, because that was certainly contemplated to make a more thorough review of the proposed maps, as what was discussed in the board meeting back when the board chose map 2. but that would be certainly an option that the board could do at this point. So I just wanted to make sure that the board understood if the board's preference is to go ahead and adopt 2 as the board initially did, or if there's a desire to consider 2A, the board could take that action, and then we would repeat the process, put this out for public comment. We would also have now available the demographic data, so the public could see and weigh in on the demographics, ask additional questions. I believe our demographer, Dr. Morrison, has made himself available for another public meeting. If that's the case, we could let him know the date of that, and we could have another hearing. I just wanted to make sure the board knew a couple of the different options that could happen today after today's discussion. Any questions by the board?
Questions? No questions here.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, Mr. Morrison, I think we thank you for your time. You've been very clarifying in our situation as far as numbers, and I think well presented, and thank you very much for your efforts.
You're very welcome.
Alrighty, with that, at this point in time, with no further comment, I will close the open public meeting and entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I don't want to move to a motion just yet. I'd like to add a couple of comments if we could. First is we have heard from a number of people involved with the committee that we put together. We in panel, Mr. Cardenas himself has been here multiple times. They were put in a position of trying to come up with maps without the kind of information and data that were provided today. It put them at a real disadvantage. And because they have committed so much time and effort to it, it feels to me, in fact, I feel fairly strongly that we ought to give them, the committee, an opportunity, if they wish, to look at crafting an additional map or reworking an existing map now that they have the benefit of the information that we have been given the benefit of the information. I don't see that it hurts to have that additional input, and I think it respects the fact that we put them in an untenable position of asking them to draw maps without the information that is available now. I think that's a respectful and proper thing to do, and it doesn't drive the train, but it respects the process and gives them an opportunity to look at the maps, and maybe they come back and say, no, we think 2 or 2A is the right answer, but I think we owe it to them to give them that opportunity to weigh in if we really truly want this to be a citizen-driven process.
Commissioner Mullen?
I have no objection to the redistricting committee if they would like to spend the time and take a look at it. As far as making decisions between maps 2 and 2A. I mean, they both come recommended by the demographer, who, as we have heard, is one of the most reputable in the nation. That we were supposed to take his information and his judgment. If anybody knows how this is supposed to be laid out, it is him. And if the redistricting committee wants to take the time and to reevaluate the differences between 2 and 2A, I'm not opposed to that. I mean, we do want to hear what the public wants, and like I said, I do appreciate all the time and effort that they've put into it. I mean, this was quite the task that was put before them. It's obviously very a lot of thought and strategy has to go into designing these maps and make sure that they are fair and equal for everyone. And so I don't know how we would ask the redistricting committee when they're not all present, but if anyone's here from the redistricting committee that would like to voice their concerns, I would be more than happy to hear them.
I'll just offer that I wasn't suggesting the redistricting committee look at 2 and 2A. I was suggesting that they look at all of their proposals. Dr. Morrison didn't say 2 and 2A are the only ones that can work. We asked the committee to prepare maps without the benefit of this data. And frankly, there's no way that any reasonable person other than luck could have come up with maps that were fully compliant without the benefit of the eligible voter data. Now that that's available to them, I'm not suggesting they go back and relook at all 6 maps, but if they've got a favorite map or 2, I think they ought to be given the respect and the opportunity to see if with these data, their preferred maps can in fact work. Or maybe they come back and say, no, 2 is the best. Whatever they come up with will be fine as long as it meets the requirements, but I think we owe it to them.
As a commissioner of this board, I thank the committee for the work they've done. They provided 6 maps. Of that, 1 map was chosen by the demographer, and he offered 1 deviation of 2 precinct changes. And those precincts are 11, which will go into District 1, and 59 that goes into District 3. If there was any remote close chance of any of those other maps making it, he would have gave us those options also. Therefore, I, as chairman and as a commissioner, I think our committee has done as much as they can do. The ultimate decision is to us. And I believe that our demographer has said that 2 or 2A is the best opportunity for us. And I think that our committee has done their just due as far as time given and putting forth maps. I don't think there's any deviation to any of the other maps that'll even work. And our demographer even said that. So with that,
Mr.
I
Chairman,
don't think there's any
that.
time, excuse me, I got the floor. I don't think there's any reason to delay this any further.
So, Mr. Chairman, the demographer didn't say that. And I'm pointing out unequivocally that we, this board, has said how important it is that we have a citizen-driven process to produce maps. And my point is simply this. We gave our citizens a task. We did not give them the information or the tools to be able to produce choices of compliant maps. And now that we have those tools, we ought to let them take a second look. That's just, they may come back and say, no, that works fine. But there's no train that's got to leave the station here right now. And I think that there are maps here that the committee has various favorites. I think they could quite easily, with the benefit of these data, produce other options that Dr. Morrison would find equally acceptable. And unless there's some crashing urgency why we got to do this today, we ought to at least have enough respect for the committee to give them an opportunity to look at it. As you said, it's ultimately up to us. We don't have to accept what they come up with, but we spend an awful lot of their time asking them to do a job without the proper tools. Once we get the tools, we step in and we do it for them and take that away. That's just antithetical to the whole concept we started with, which is a citizen-driven process. Why we wouldn't give them a voice now is beyond me.
So with that,
I have one question here.
Go
I
ahead.
see that Lupe Cardenas is in there.
well, I was just going to move to that, Rocky.
Okay.
I have closed the open public hearing on redistricting map, but we are at, and I will move it in front of administration business. I'm going to put public comment in front of administration business and ask this time for the members of the committee that are present to please come forward and tell us what you would prefer to do.
Lupe Cardenas for the record. I guess to me, sometimes I look at how you make decision with sometimes less information that you have, but you do a good job of finding the information out. It'd be great, but I don't know if we're going to move the needle anyway. I know what the public wanted, maps 3 and 4, they like the going up and down vertically. That's when I took notes. That's what they said. If you want to go to that way and make those maps fit, I think you can get them to do that, to get into the percentage, if you want that look. If you want to pack them in town, that's a different deal. But if you're talking representation, the commissioner is taking representation from town, which all commissioners, I think, have county and city represented. That's what a lot of the public wanted. So if you want to address those issues, fine, you can do that. I'm saying you can make a good decision today, or you can delay it 2 days. But I think the 2 proposals you have there, why waste more time? I mean, I'm just saying I'm fine with, I can meet, but I'm not sure the meeting, and I'm not going to speak for the core committee. It's not going to say if we're going to come up with any better answers, because we'll have to have somebody analyze those. If you move them a little bit, those precincts, you have to analyze it, give the percentages. So that's going to take more time and money from the demographer, and I know he's busy doing other things, but to do that properly, you have to do that. So we will have to, that committee. So for that, I don't know if I need to do and revisit more, because expect you like to 4, but that might be better. I like 3 and 4 in the beginning. But because of the representation that I feel that everybody needs to have, city and county. That's kind of like Mr. George says. So for me, that's kind of what if we want to consider those, that'd be great. But if we don't, I'm fine with just option 1 or 2, 2A or 2, whatever. So.
One question: did the demographer give you those informations as far as what maps he would stand behind?
He did, and I do have them. I do have that information with me. On option 1, he gave us which he didn't like as option 1. The maps is 81% Spanish. So on option 2 would be 68% Spanish. And he also broken down by district. If you wanted to know, like option 1, it'd be 81% to be Spanish. The district 2 on that particular would be 33% and 35%. But I'll just mention that option 2 was 68%. Option 3, it'd be 80%. Option 4 would be 79%, and option 5 was going to be 73%. And you can break those down a little bit by the district if you wanted. So. Option 6, he never got a chance at that because we proposed that later on. But he did have that a little bit. He didn't have it all total because he hadn't had a chance to really deeply analyze. So, but he mentioned that once you go to 86%, why not take some of those numbers and bring them down, take from an 80 to a 68%, and then you'll have two districts with the same overpopulation in Spanish. So you actually, if you have option 4, it'd be too high. It'd be too high, so you bring it down a little bit, and so you'll have the control of 2 counties. The Spanish people will be so it won't be diluting it. But anyway, so that's what he said. So it gets at what you wanted to accomplish, but can it be accomplished with those maps? Yes, it can. But that's why he said you could just move the numbers down. Whether somebody else will like it, don't know. Whether it's plus the mustard. So.
Yeah, Mr. Cardenas, I think the numbers you just gave were off of the total populations, not the eligible voter numbers. And that was the concern I had, was that you were asked to draw maps using data for total population that really left you in a position that you couldn't possibly know which ones would or wouldn't be viable. So that's all I was trying to do, is give you an opportunity to look at the maps based on the numbers that actually matter. And you expressed earlier your disappointment that you didn't have these data to do this, simply trying to give you an opportunity now to do it with the benefit of the data. You've made clear that you don't feel you need to do that, so I appreciate that feedback, but I just felt like I needed to offer that. I am curious, though, what the rest of the committee might think, and obviously you can't speak for them.
No, and I'm not, I mean, it's my personal opinion. So we did have a little data from him, but he didn't have the whole data. The data for the census did not come in until, like, I want to say late September. So when we were in those meetings, we didn't have a lot of data. So that's my question to Mr. Peterson.
Right.
Why is it using 2019 since we have 2020 data? So that's what, as a committee, we didn't have that until we got down. And here to Michael, here we started getting able to get that started helping us, and then he came to help us a little bit more when what we have, what that was going to fit, because at that time he still not quite have all the data. So that goes back to that. So we didn't have all the data all the time, and I know what you're saying. We didn't have it, but now we have that. And so from what I know, you know now, I guess we don't have to waste more time. But you can say enough data. Will it be better, nice to make the whole public involved? What you're suggesting, I think that'd be great. So I don't have a problem with it, as long as it doesn't interfere with my skiing, that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay?
I just thought we had an opportunity to offer, and, you know, you've certainly got an opportunity to say no thanks, or yes, we'd like to, or whatever, and.
Yeah. I mean, it's, for me,
All good.
I'm okay, I'm good, so, thanks.
George Dockstetter. I personally, we could go back, and this is according to the demographer, and we could take every one of those maps with the information we have and tweak them and change precinct here and a precinct there and come up with numbers. But I'm sorry, that's not our job. We presented you with options, and if there's one you like, you're the ones that are supposed to be able to tweak the map to make it fit so that we're in compliance with what goes on as far as populations and voting. We did not have the voting age deal. We just had population to work with. And the one thing I want to say about the voting for the non-citizens, you go over to DMV, the first thing they ask you, are you registered to vote? And do you want to register? They don't ask you if you're a citizen. So if you got a driver's license, you can be registered to vote in this state. Thank you.
So this is public comment. We've heard from the two members of the board. Anybody else care to speak?
I'm about to shock you all. I actually agree with Commissioner Didier on something. I know, Clint, let that wash over all of us. I think that what Commissioner Peck was trying to do was a very wonderful and respectful gesture, but I also understand where Commissioner Didier is coming from. Look, I still don't think that map is legal. I really don't. I think your demographer misunderstands the Washington State Voting Rights Act and some of the requirements. I could be wrong, and I have always been open if I'm wrong to admitting so. You've seen me do it, humiliating as it can be. But I think Commissioner Didier makes a really good point. At some point, this does have to stop. At some point, we do have to submit something to the court. We have to let the court decide. When I made the comment earlier and said, go with God, that wasn't meant as an insult. That literally did mean we've reached a point where not one of us is actually going to be able to control this. I will be praying this evening for the county and for all three of you, because I do that every night, actually. You know, that's not an insult. That's me just telling you. I will be praying that whatever we decide we can all live with, and that whatever happens, that we can all come together after it, and that we can all actually return to when we tried to get to know one another and have better discussions about where we want to take the county. And that's incumbent on all of us. The reality is, though, this has got to end. And the longer that this goes on, the more divisive it becomes for everyone who gets involved. The more every single person connected to it at this point finds the worst in themselves brought out, whether they meant it to or not. So let us have conclusion, and if the judge agrees with you, and if the state Supreme Court, assuming we end up going in that direction, agrees with you, so be it. The law will have spoken, we will have done what we were supposed to do. But it's very obvious you're not really, no matter what happens, going to deviate from this map or 2A. Was that what it was? 2A? It's obvious you're going to pick one of those two maps. Let's cut the cord, let's take the leap, let's do it. And let's also remember, once again, that Commissioner Peck, when he made his suggestion, was trying to show respect for a citizen-led process. Commissioner Didier, when making his suggestion, was just trying to give us some closure to a dangerous and painful moment in our history that needs to come to an end. Thank you.
I should say one more thing as being on the committee. When we talked to the demographer, we were all sitting there at the HAPO, and I think we had everybody there in person that night, if I'm right, Keith. And he basically came down with this map and option 4. And he said option 4, you could get in and tweak it. And that's what we would do if we re-met as a committee to try and get the numbers right, is just move a precinct or something. That's, I feel, honestly, that's up for the three of you to decide. If you want to look at option 4, you can get in and tweak a couple precincts. Michael here is real good at doing that. He was helpful. The whole staff was helpful for the committee, from Keith, Michael, everybody involved that we have there. I don't think there's a rush to make a decision today. This is a pretty big decision, and I think the three of you should take your time and come up and study it yourselves and make your decision, but don't do it in a rush. Thank you.
I'd like to call on just a little bit of what each of these people have said. I don't think that this is a dangerous process, and I don't think the further we go, it's more divisive. But there's areas of all of everybody's comments that are helpful. I wondered if you would share with us what the time frame is that we need to make this decision in. If you'd share with us the time frame, if time is not of a huge push, then I think that it would be helpful to take a little bit more time to consider that. And then along with that, I appreciate our prosecuting attorney's clarification on that there was a time frame that we met by last Tuesday night, and crossing that line, or not last Tuesday night, but our last night meeting when you picked map number 2. And that was a time frame that has now passed. What is the next pieces of the process? So if you lay that out, I think that could potentially make the next steps clearer in this process. Thank you.
Mr. Johnson, do you have that information?
I'd probably have to defer to Sean a little bit.
Okay.
I would just say that the committee has been operating on kind of a two-pronged issue, with the litigation being one of those and the statutory framework of December 30th as the other. And Sean could probably better clarify what the next timeline would look like.
I think the biggest thing right now is that there's two things going on. We've tried to separate out the litigation prong. This discussion and the decision that was made back in December was simply to make the required adjustment that's required upon receipt of the new census data. It would make sense to have a decision sooner than later, because this is an election year, and obviously to give adequate time for individuals that might be contemplating running for office, regardless of which of the offices that might be available. This could have an important impact on their decision making. And so I don't think there's a per se set time limit at this point. I believe Brittany's on the line as well if she wants to weigh in on that, but I think because we're not really adjusting something because of court action, we're making a decision based on the requirement to readjust the districts based on the population shift. I think it's been helpful to have the demographic information, so that way the board is contemplating the efforts and recognizing that certainly demographics does weigh into the Voting Rights Act, and obviously the board would want to choose something that potentially would be defensible to move forward. But for this point, in compliance with the redistricting based on population, it makes sense to probably do that as soon as practicable, but certainly I think making sure the board is comfortable with the public input, any additional input that might go out or come in from all of the redistricting committee, that's up to the board to decide. And I'll just go back, if the board wants to adopt what has been put forth as option 2, that was the discussion in public. I don't know that option 2A, because it is just a slight deviation and it already contemplates the public comment from the previous week. I don't believe that would necessarily require a second meeting, but always deferring to having an opportunity for public at large to weigh in on an important issue like this. I don't think it would be unduly prohibitive or restrictive of the board to delay for that proper notice to go out. I would just say, if the board does choose to delay, I know the board closed the public hearing. I would just offer that if the board chooses to have a continuation, simply to undo that closure, so that way it's an open public session, and that the board would, if the board wants to, continue to make itself available to receive any kind of written communication to the board, or take another hearing to get one final round of public comment with publication of the board's final choice. That's certainly an opportunity too. So I just want to make sure you have those options, and I think that alleviates some of the timing issues if we basically were to continue public comment for another time. Just simply undo the closure, so that way it is open and the board can continue to receive input from the public, whether at a meeting or through written correspondence.
So, Mr. Chairman, I don't have any desire to drag this process out. I got my answer as to whether or not the committee wanted additional time to revisit. It doesn't sound like there's a great desire to do that, but I appreciate the opportunity to fill that square and be respectful to them. And if it's the interest of the board to move this thing forward, then it seems the choice between 2 and 2A is the one that doesn't require another hearing, given that they're both nearly identical. And so I could support map 2 at this point. If we do 2A, I think we have to have another hearing.
So Brittany, are you on the phone?
I am.
Is there any other time deadlines that we have to meet here besides that December 31st of choosing a map?
That's correct. So the December 31st deadline was met for the first proposed draft map. There are no set calendar deadlines. There's just a set period of time from when a draft map is published for public comment and when it's finally adopted by the county.
Thank you. So we heard from 2 members of the committee. Commissioner Mullen, what is your opinion on this?
I, again, would like to thank the Redistricting Committee for their time and efforts. It was quite the task that was asked of them. I believe that they presented the maps before us to make a decision, and I honestly don't see the need to drag it out any longer. We should thank them for their time. It's truly appreciated. Time is something that you can take, but you can never give it back. So I would like to thank you for that time, and I think that we need to move forward. I would make the motion that we accept plan option 2 as presented.
Second.
There's been a motion and a second to pick plan number 2 as our new map for Franklin County. All in favor say aye.
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 Aye. With that, Keith, we'll move down to administrative office business.
I think you've covered what I needed to get covered today, so I think I'm good.
And are we going to be needing this closed session
Yes.
RCW?
Yes.
Okay, so we'll move into executive session RCW 42.030.140
Mr. Chairman,
parentheses 4 parentheses B.
I apologize for interrupting. It's actually a closed session under that RCW, which is a distinction from an executive session, which applies to the OPMA. So it's a
So
legal
it is a
distinction.
closed session,
It's a closed
not an
session.
executive.
Correct.
Okay, so it's a closed session, RCW 42.030.140 parentheses 4 parentheses B. collective bargaining for 30 minutes.
Just for the record, we have the board, Eric Wyant from HR, the clerk and myself participating in that.
the mics aren't on. Okay, we've come out of closed session and we're back into regular session. And is there any other business for the good of the county? Hearing none, I'd also like to compliment Jennifer on her first day here as clerk. Great job, and thank you very much. And with that, this meeting is adjourned.